Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we are back for our midweek edition of Last Word on Spurs. And for many, this will be a pick-me-up. It will be a case of maybe trying to turn some doubters into believers. How ironic that probably is the host at the moment of this bloody show. If you're with us for the first time, you can find us on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms. We're of course on X. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook too. And joining me as always, I've got my wonderful co-host alongside me. It is the dream team. Matty Hayes is back. Matt, you're smiling at the moment. We need that smile as we are in the midst of an international break away from the transfer window. And we've now got a wonderful guest to join us, Matt. I'm sure you agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can probably still count on one hand the amount of conversations we've had, Ricky, that hasn't been about transfers. So it's nice to add another one to that list. And I'm really excited for the show. I haven't had the pleasure of sharing the screen with this guest before, but I've watched the previous shows and really, really enjoyed them. So I'm looking forward to being part of the conversation this evening.
Love that, Matt. Fantastic. Look, it's been a pleasure to welcome this man to our screens, a man that we've got to know fairly well since the appointment of Ange Postecoglou, and a guest of ours that we've loved having on this show to get the wonderful insight behind our head coach, the adversity that he deals with, the challenges that he deals with season upon season. We're delighted to welcome back to the Last Word on Spurs, the wonderful John Greechan with us, of course, author of Revolution, Ange Postecoglou's book, The Man, The Methods and The Mastery, recently updated. John, thank you so much. I think it's fair to say you join us at a time where there's a little bit of negativity amongst the ranks. So, John, we can't thank you enough for joining us.
Hey, it's football and it's Spurs. Come on. What would you expect?
I love that. I think the funny thing is, John, when we had you on here for the first time, you recently admitted the fact that at that time that you know what Spurs are like. It's a bit of a chaotic, bit of a crazy club. So with Ange Postecoglou at the helm, you said to think at the time, strap in. If anything, this is going to be an adventure.
Yeah, it's just always the way it was going to be. It was never going to be coming in and steadying the ship and doing a George Graham job. Like, oh, we'll just make ourselves nice and difficult to beat and we'll eventually carve out some 1-0 wins and I'll sell David Ginola and we'll just go back to this. He was never going to do any of that. He was going to come in, embrace the whole thing, the entire ethos of the club, go full throttle, hell for leather, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. You know, I've got to say, just on this point, John, I'm bringing Matt in. Matt, I know, again, social media, I know me and you are we're on it, but we're not in every single comment that people are saying with all due respect. But have you ever known a time, Matt, there's just so much negativity going into the start of a second season of a manager, just 3 games in, and there's just a lot of it online at the moment? Does that surprise you, Matt, or is that just the nature maybe of the Spurs fan base? I think we're all a bit perplexed maybe as to what we all really do want. We all want trophies, don't get me wrong. We all want success, but I think so many people have different navigation of ways of getting there, Matt. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think, look, there's definitely been more negativity in the fan base in the past, but I'd say there's never been as much of what I would class as unwarranted negativity as there is in the fan base at the moment. And I think maybe it's an interesting correlation with the players that Ange Postecoglou has had throughout his career, that the way he does things needs maybe a little bit more buy-in than you'd need from most other managers, and where it's clear that not every player is able to buy into that 100%. It's definitely clear that the fan base is the same, except the only difference is the players have the option to leave, whereas we're stuck with this for quite some more time. And I'm not putting myself in the category of people who haven't bought into it. But yeah, it's definitely a very split fan base at the moment. And I think in the past, when things have started to go wrong with managers, there's been, we want the manager out to maybe let's just give him more time. Whereas now we're at people wanting the manager out and people being completely committed to the project that's at hand. So it's such a massive gap in between the two kind of main parties in the fan base at the moment. But look, I think most would agree, even those who aren't fully on side with Ange Postecoglou, that it's a whole lot better than it was when we were playing terrible football and not winning trophies. At least there's some good football and some excitement there in the middle of it all.
Yeah. I have to ask John, can you believe we're even having this conversation? I think 12 months ago when you came on this show, we were, of course, on that unbelievable unbeaten run to start the season, the honeymoon period, many would call it, of course. What do you make of the mood 12 months on, John? Are you surprised? Are you shocked? Is that football? Is that Ange ball? What would you say to that?
Well, I think, Ricky, we've discussed it a few times. I mean, you've got to take every individual club into the history into account, and there's a lot of scar tissue with Spurs fans. There just is. That's just going to be the way it is, and most clubs will have that to a certain degree. But it's particularly a club where it always seems to be hopes raised, hopes dashed, hopes raised, hopes dashed. So there is going to be a knee-jerk element to some of the reaction. There has to be sometimes. It's the Premier League. I mean, everyone knows. It's almost like the ultimate distillation of club football. So you get even less time. You get even, less understanding. It's incredibly intense. Every team, I think we discussed right at the start, every team can beat you, just about, I'm not surprised by anything that happens in there. I'm not surprised by anything about fans either. I mean, I wrote it. So the new edition you say is out now. That's, if I can show you, that's the cover. So it's got a Spurs photo on it. See, he's in his Spurs gear. But we covered the first kind of, spell at Spurs, and going back over it to write it, I was reminded of just how much negativity there was. It was it was remarkable. So I don't think that was ever going to disappear forever. There were a lot of people when it was going well, waiting in the long grass to wait for the first stumble to come charging out and say, I told you. Right? And that's just human nature. You've had an opinion, you're getting proved wrong. When it goes right again, you're going to jump on it. What's the point in having a mind if you don't change it? But football gets you entrenched on things. People will die on ridiculous hills, on short corners versus long corners, on 3 at the back versus 4 at the back. So that's all got to be mixed into it. And it's why he loves the game. I think it's why we all love the game, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do agree on that. I am surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be because of the world of social media now, we're 2024, just how quickly opinions do shift and change just in the blink. I mean, I know it's football. I know football is a results-driven business. And I know, again, listen, there's been times when this is a fairly emotive show with an amazing panel that come in a week upon week and give their views on Spurs. But it is fascinating when you think, again, I look back 12 months from now or before that, just how the mood was around the fan base, the fact that this man came in, he revolutionised it. And don't get me wrong, I think, because we know at the moment that the free games, which come on to in a second, they have shown, I think, progress in terms of the football from the back in the last season. Haven't necessarily got the results, but I do think at Tottenham, as we've always said before, it's not always the managers. I think you have to look at the squads, you have to look at the chairman. Of course, Daniel Levy, he's been here for 20, 25 years, and that's probably the one constant about the football club, that it does feel that in every window a manager has not always been given what they want, what they need. And that's why I think it's intriguing to bring you on the show, John, because you've got that, of course, experience and knowledge of Ange, what he's been given in previous windows under previous clubs and chairmans, that he would normally want a certain type of profile of player, which again makes the show interesting. So, Matt, I'm going to open up to you to kick us off here.
Yeah, it's been a mixed start to the new season for Tottenham, John, and the underlying data, I think, is one thing that we're taking a lot of solace from. Tottenham have taken 48 shots in their first 3 games of the season, according to Opta, which is more than any other team in the Premier League, excluding Nottingham Forest. We rank 1 behind Forest for shots on target with 20, and we're joint second for efforts outside the box with 18 behind Crystal Palace, which I think was one of the main criticisms put on Tottenham and the way they played last season. But for the second time out of 3 games against Newcastle on Sunday, Tottenham dominated for large parts of the game, didn't take the chances, suffered a blow after turning off, and just really struggled to get back into the game, and are going into this first international break of the season with 4 points rather than the 9 that a lot of fans would think we should have, given the dominance we've had in those games. And Postecoglou was clear in his disappointment at dropping 3 points against Newcastle in a match where we were on top for large stages, but we were ultimately unable to make a telling breakthrough to seal the points, a theme that we saw in that opening game of the season against Leicester as well. Now, in between those games, Tottenham did ramp to a 4-0 home victory against Everton, showing just how good we can be. But lacking killer instinct now is something that's cost us in 2 of the opening 3 games. So I'm interested to get your thoughts on how you think Tottenham have started the season in those opening 3 games. Yeah,
it's interesting. I'm very encouraged to hear you talk about the stats like that. I think there's a great understanding of what they can tell you now. They don't always back up what you think, but I know increasingly coaches will use them as well to tell them where they're going right and where they're going wrong. More than anything, I think we've seen a lot of good patterns of play. We've seen a lot of good attacking movements. You talk about the shots numbers. It's not just that. It's the quality of the final third entries, getting in and cutting the ball back, or getting in and creating chances, hammering it across the box, whatever you want to call it. It's things that there are different ways to get there, but these are recurring themes that he's always wanted in his football. These are the areas we hit there, we deliver it there, that's where we score goals from. And, he could, if he wanted to, quote you all the stats to back it up, but he doesn't need to because he just tells you that's how we do it. And you go, okay, well, we've been doing it for quite a long time now. We'll just do that. He'll be disappointed with the defence, obviously. I mean, I think this is one of the things that came across to everyone I spoke to when I first went out to Melbourne, stayed in Pran for a week and met all the people he'd worked with and everything. You thought you were going to get this purist, like, oh, it was just going to be this guy who just loves to play the fact to be, man, he's a winner. He is a winner. And the guys that played with him, the guys that played against him, the guys that when he was captain, they would give him a bollocking. He was absolutely ferocious about winning. So it'll be hurting him. It'll be annoying him. I think he'll be plotting away during this international break.
Can I ask you one question before Matt comes back in, John? You mentioned about the defence there. It feels the notion, certainly amongst us as Spurs fans, is that it sounds crazy. Me saying this to say this as a football fan or a Spurs fan or any kind of fan of football. There's no emphasis, John, on actually defending and wanting to keep a clean sheet. It seems like a lot of it is about scoring goals, and it's not the end of the world if Spurs do let in a couple, as long as they score 3 or 4. Can you dispel that notion? Do you believe in that notion?
I think it probably suits to have that reputation sometimes. But from speaking to people that work with him, and remember speaking to him about it a couple of times, you know, everything for him starts with their out of possession work. That's where it's like, if that doesn't work, if that's not right, nothing works. Because it's not just about stopping goals, but it's about winning the ball right back in the correct areas, the most dangerous areas. So he will work harder than some managers would that on out of possession work. So this notion that it's all about creating pretty patterns and swarming the event, yeah, of course they throw bodies forward. And of course they will leave one guy patrolling a really large area. The idea is to be good enough that you just control it and do it. But their out of possession work he's very meticulous about that, about what he wants to do and where he wants the opposition to go and how to present when the opposition have got the ball, to present them with 2 bad choices, no good choices. You know, your bad choices getting turned over here, turned over there. Which one do you want?
I want to have a look at more of those stats that we were speaking about there, John, and that game against Newcastle. It's a game where Tottenham dominated possession with 66%. We had way more passes, 415 to Newcastle's 180, with 20 shots to 9. And the Newcastle defence made 33 clearances and 8 blocks, as well as 6 saves by goalkeeper Nick Pope. Tottenham did also finish the game against Newcastle with fewer expected goals than the opposition. It was 1.3 to 1.61 in favour of Newcastle, as the viewers on YouTube can see on the screen there, which illustrates really that for all the possession and territory that we had, it was very low quality chances that the Tottenham fashioned throughout the game. And of the 20 shots that we had, only 2 were worth more than 0.1 XG. And with 49 touches in Newcastle's box, the 5th most of a top flight team so far this season, you would maybe expect that the Tottenham should have been able to create better opportunities than that. And just like the frustrating 1-1 draw against Leicester, it felt like a centre forward issue and a creation issue at the top end of the pitch as much as it was a defensive one at the other end, like Ricky mentioned there. Can you remember a time in Ange Postecoglou's career so far where his team have really struggled like this at both ends of the pitch?
Yeah, very early in his spells at a lot of clubs, and he's gone through spells like this where he's not had the striker he wanted. He's not had, and that can actually affect the defence as well. Not having the striker he wants and needs to set the press properly to do what you need. So they can be both sides of one problem, 2 sides of the coin. They're going in here, but he's gone through. I think as Ricky will tell you, we've talked about it before. He went through long, difficult spells where people were calling for his head, where players were trying to get him out of clubs, where nobody believed in what he was doing. And he has said he enjoys that time when people are doubting it because he knows what's just coming just around the corner. Haven't spoken to him recently, so I'm not sure how confident he feels on that at the moment. But you would imagine he'd be sitting there going, yeah, it's all right. We're coming back. We know what we're doing. We're doing the right things. But I think we get too caught up sometimes in imagining, Coach A does this, Coach B does that, Coach C. They have to constantly involve, and he has constantly involved his tactics and his approaches and his message and messaging. Going to Japan, he didn't have his greatest tool, which is the ability to talk to players and tell stories. He didn't have that, so he had to develop different things. He made more use of video analysis. At Celtic, he probably had players who were just a different type in many ways. Some were not quite as technical as the guys he worked with, but they had a different kind of quality to them. And some of them he turned into players who you didn't think were technical, but actually played really well in his technical system because he broke it down for them and made it simple. So yeah, I think you talk about a centre forward issue. That's it's been that way for a while, isn't it? Since Harry left and with the injuries and everything else, nobody thought Charleston was really an Ange centre forward. And then what's the latest on Solanke?
Well, I mean, they're hoping to be back for Arsenal, but I think you make that point, John, that what you can't legislate for is not having the players there to work with. And I mean, that interestingly brings us on to the summer transfer window, which many have got an opinion on. And I will just probably say that, I don't know age Matt's a lot younger than me, bless his heart. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot more Enoch, Daniel Levy transfer windows than I can care to imagine. But I do think the feeling over the most recent one that we've seen with Spurs is, look, let's bring the stats out there. Summer transfer window, 125 million spent, 42 million from sales, 5 players in, 9 players out for good. The wage bill's down by 32 million. The average squad age is down to 25. I mean, look, it was another busy window for Ange this summer. Dominic Solanke came in on a club record 65 million. We have to point it out that he wasn't available for the, of course, games against Everton, respectively, and of course against Newcastle, where he picked up an injury in the back end of that Leicester game, of course, on his opening game for the club. The likes of Archie Gray, Wilson Odobert, Lucas Bergvall all arrived, while South Korean youngster Min-hyuk will join in January. I have to ask you, John, bearing in mind in the summer, this is a manager who says, usually I win that in my second season. I'm not interested in finishing second, third, fourth. I only want first. I'm intrigued to know from you personally, from the outsider looking in, what you made of Spurs' window. There's been talk that Spurs are maybe building a squad for a post-Pep Guardiola era rather than looking to win right now. Love to know your thoughts on what you've made of Spurs' business with Ange Postecoglou at the helm.
Yeah, I think what history teaches is that he goes for very specific players to do very specific jobs to fit into how he wants to play. He has his criteria and he works through them. He's not going to be blinded by... I mean, we talked about this when Harry Kane was going. You were like, yeah, if Harry Kane had stayed, they would have been brilliant together. Absolutely clever footballer, clever manager. They'd have found a way to work out. But if he was signing a player, he probably wouldn't pick him as his guy. So if something ridiculous comes up that gives him a chance to really take a leap forward, yes. But this looks like a planned summer window. It looks like he's had specific types in mind for specific roles, specific positions, but also to give him flexibility to change things within that.
And, in terms of the squad, just one more thing from me. I mean, there is that notion outside that at the end of the day, look, he, from what we understand, approved every signing. He was public in saying that as well. Do you think they've done enough just on the opinion piece that he has turned around and said on numerous occasions, John, as you know, he's not here to finish fourth, not here to finish third, not here to finish second. He wants to win. He wants to win the Premier League. This is what he's telling us as Spurs fans. Do you look at the business Spurs have done and feel that they're any closer to achieving that under Ange Postecoglou in this coming season?
Oh, it's a tough one, mate. I mean, I'd like to point out that it was on here. I said he'll believe he can win the league. And then about 4 weeks later, he said it publicly. So I was like, at least I'm on the right wavelength.
Absolutely.
It's so hard, isn't it? I mean, City can just do whatever the heck they want, depending on, maybe some charges to answer this year. They've turned it into such a difficult race that the points total you need to win the league is going to be ridiculous. Liverpool look resurgent. Chelsea will continue to spend billions of pounds while getting it wrong, which is always a hoot. I don't know. It's so hard to judge. If he's got the right types for the right positions, then he'll fancy it. That's all you can say about it.
And just one final one from me before Matt comes back in there. When you compare his other windows that he's had at previous clubs, the likes of Celtic in Japan, of course, you go back to where he's been. Did you feel that in those second seasons? I know, again, it's hard to say third and fourth season. He wasn't always there for the third and fourth season, but predominantly in that second season, did you feel you saw a progression in the kind of caliber of players that he was bringing in? Were they more of a high level, or were they more kind of a bit unknown, more youthful type of players that were there to more kind of be more daring, be more fearful?
he's had a high turnover at quite a lot of clubs simply because he comes in and they're players who either can't or won't do what he wants to do. And, you don't want conscripts, you want willing recruits and converts. So I'm trying to think back to Brisbane. Yeah, I mean, Brisbane in particular, he turned over a whole load of really established, the player of the year from the year before. The hugely popular, massive names at the club, got them out and replaced them with other players that would be less well known. And then embarked on the longest undefeated run in Australian sports history, created Barcelona. And I'm trying to think, remember in Japan, he had a massive turnover between the first and second season as well. Although that was more of a winning converts job from when the players were really in open revolt against him. Going and speaking to the translator and saying, who the hell is this guy? Get him out of here. He won those over, but he also, it's always been accompanied by bringing in more and turning it over and making sure that, I think when he wants to look at his depth chart, which he'll have probably behind his desk up on the wall, and you have all that, you want to be able to look at every single face on that and go, yep, trust him. He can do that. He doesn't want to be having one there and going, oh, Christ, I wish I didn't still have him here. Wish he wasn't my third choice left winger because I'm not sure he can do what we need.
An interesting constant almost in those players that we have brought in, and the youthful recruitment that Ricky's mentioned there, is the young age of these players. The average age of our signings this summer is 21.8, further bringing down the age of the average squad. Postecoglou dismissed the notion that it's harder for senior players to buy into his way of football, which is the reason for bringing in a number of younger and possibly hungrier players in the summer. Do you feel, given the way Ange wants to play football, that younger players rather than senior heads might just buy into that philosophy more and be more open to, I suppose, the moulding that the Postecoglou might want to do?
He's got a kind of history of winning over different ages. I mean, there's been quite a few guys I spoke to who were played under him, who were older players and were getting told to completely change their philosophy on football, who bought into it. The problem is if you've got a player who's been taught to play one way, specifically, they may want to buy in it and they just can't do it, and that's just difficult. I also think the age thing may be an economic thing. Let's be honest about it. You can get a 21-year-old showing progress for what's a medium-sized Premier League fee these days, 25-30 million, whereas you wait till he's 25 and you're not getting him because Man City buy him and sit him on the bench, or PSG buy him and sit him on the bench, just to give someone a rest every now and again. So there's probably an economic reason as much as that. I don't think there's an age thing. Probably you're right. I mean, everyone knows it. If you get a player who's not developed a lot of bad habits and you can teach them your way, it probably makes it easier.
So I know it's hard, John, because you're not in the Spurs boardroom, but if we use that term, has he been backed? Would you say he's been backed? I mean, he's had quite a lot of money when you think about it. 125 million spent. That's a lot of money. There's that comment around being backed because maybe it's not the players that us as fans wanted. Again, there was a lot of talk about, for Spurs fans like me and Matt, and getting many thousands and millions out of you wonderful people. I know many wanted the likes of an Eze, a Pedro Neto, a Paulinho, of course, and I think that the hard thing is when we looked at the way we ended last season, Ange called for change inside the football club, change both internally and change externally. I think that got us thinking that maybe what he does want in there is a couple of mature heads that when things aren't going quite well, like the Leicester game, and they find a way back in the game, and similar to Newcastle, and of course, these 2 out of the 3 games we've had so far this season, you've got players there that are a calming influence that can recognise as a problem and get you back into that game. And I think the thing is, when you're looking at Spurs' squad at the moment, although they've got experience in there, like the likes of Basuma and Bentancur, don't get me wrong, it doesn't scream out that there's a huge amount of experience there that's going to really guide this team through. And for a side that are fighting on all 4 fronts, that we want to be fighting on all 4 fronts, of course, and you know how desperate we are, John, for a cup. I've told you on here so many times how much we need a trophy. Yeah, and I think interesting. Ange has got that opportunity in a couple of weeks' time to rectify the wrongs with Coventry coming up. I think that's the question that many are asking. This squad looks like it's 2 or 3 players short, and I think it goes back to, again, your previous knowledge and history of the man. Surely he would have not only signed off on those players, but he would have been in agreement with the window to some degree, because the feeling around fans in general over the last 20, 25 years is that very rarely does a manager get all they want in a transfer window. Probably in your experience, they don't always get what they want, right? It's a balance.
No, I mean, like, if you ask every manager in the world, I'm just 2-3 short. 2-3 guys short of what I need. That's all they are. Forever, 2 or 3 guys short of what they need. So you probably want 2 or 3 more. I don't think the age thing in this, you say looking for old heads to turn it around. If you're a good enough coach and you've got a good enough plan and you've drilled them well enough, the big part of his coaching in particular is presenting them with problems that they're going to face on match day and let them solve it, and then show them how to solve it and explain how they solve it and figure out ways around it. And that's what every coach does. They'll run through phases of play based on what the opposition are going to do. So he'll have plan A, B, C, D, whatever it is, that the players are all well briefed. And if you've got that, you don't necessarily need 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 old heads. I mean, I think, listen, we all know the players, the guys you mentioned and Sonny are just enormously important players, and they would be at any team. Yeah. I think that's as much to do with their quality as anything else.
You've already kind of answered part of this question already, John. You know, you said he will be hurting right now. He'll definitely want to put things right. And I think the one thing that we do see is on the touchline that he's not always the most emotional type. And you'll probably know him better than me. I mean, Spurs do run a kind of Ange cam sometimes in terms of his general demeanour. But he certainly looks like he's cutting a frustrated figure at the moment on the touchline, which is natural. Look, he's a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve. Very much like that in press conferences as well, both pre and post. You can see his reaction. We're lucky to have had many of the journalists on that attend a lot of those press conferences with Ange. I want to ask you, you know, when you look at his figure at the moment and a man that you've known so well, I'm sure he'll be deeply hurting, right? Because definitely the performances are not getting the results that are being warranted. How much will that really tear away at him?
Yeah, that will. I think you can see his frustration, as you point out correctly, is when they're not doing the things that he expects them to do and that they've worked on. And that is just part of football management. I remember years ago working with an old manager who'd got hooked up to a heart monitor way back in the days for a game, for a little feature on something. And when the opposition had the ball, it was like a resting pace. Nothing. When his team had the ball, it went through the roof. And his argument was, well, when the opposition have the ball, we do what we can do. We're doing our defensive work. It was all going all right. When we got the ball, it was like, oh, no. What are we going to do? How are we going to get this? Are we going to do it now? Because they put so much into it, and he's one that puts so much into it. And he would admit he's the worst loser. He's the grumpiest man. He goes home. He doesn't. I think I told you the story that he'd mentioned last time of he had friends fly over from Australia, and they lost, and he wouldn't go out that night with his wife had to go out with the friends from Australia, and he was left sitting at home in Glasgow. And she was like, I can't believe you're doing this. And he's like, I'll be no good company.
I think I say we go on that point there. I'm sure, Matt, you agree. I think one thing we can all agree with Matt, he's naturally a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve, and I think we see that, Matt. He's finding it tough at the moment. Is that fair to say? Just you can see that mentally, it's difficult for him.
Yeah, I think so, and like it's of course it's a bigger level than he's ever been at. It's a bigger challenge than he's ever had, and I don't think at this point that he'll be doubting his methodologies and his philosophies. Because of course even though he's relatively new to the bigger stage of football, their philosophies and methodologies that he's followed for so long, you know, he's 110% bought into them in the same way he needs the players to be. And while he might enjoy, as John said, the moments where he has doubters and the moments where people aren't fully in there, I'm sure that there's going to be, as there will be with anyone, he's only human. There will be an element of, well, what if it doesn't work here? What if this is not my undoing, but if this is the place where I can't make it happen? I don't think it'll be detrimental to him in any way whatsoever. But interesting segue with what you just mentioned there, John, about how they care so much about in possession. But I do want to ask you about a factor that we've seen in Tottenham's opening games of this season and even last season, where despite dominating games, one simple through ball at so many times has been Tottenham's undoing. And it feels as though if a player in possession makes one mistake in this system, the whole thing comes crashing down like a pack of cards. And for example, with the Newcastle game, as the viewers on YouTube can see on screen there, it was Joe Linton's pass that went in between a Romero who's holding the line and a Dragusin and fullbacks who are running back towards goal. And we were completely caught out of possession there for the first goal. Destiny Udogie the same. It allowed Murphy to run clear on goal, who squared for Isak, who put the ball in the empty net. and Pedro Porro on the other side, nowhere near having been further up the pitch as we attacked. The high line, you've always said Ange isn't going to veer away from that or adapt, but do you think it's sustainable to work in the Premier League given the higher level of coaches, players, managers that he's in competition with now in comparison to where Ange has been before?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and it may be something that he adapts. But the first thing to point out is the high line's a slightly misunderstood tactic in that you're all trying to do the same thing, which is take space away from the opposition attack. And some do it by sending deep, some do it by keeping the high line. It looks more risky at times. It does not work if you do not get pressure on the ball. And that's coaching 101. Everyone knows that. If you play a high line and give the opposition time to pass, you're in trouble getting sprung over the top. The issue here is that every single player in the Premier League can probably play that pass. Now, so you have to be on pressuring them all the time, all the way. It's not like most teams you will find a left back or a left centre half or a right centre who you go, well, we'll just push the ball to him and he can't do it. He can't play that pass. So that's where we'll squeeze him over. And then we can kind of look for a trap in there. But if you're in the Premier League and your third choice right back can ping a 60-yarder into the space, it becomes a tricky thing. I don't know how he's going to address that. I don't see him. Again, the other thing with Highland, even the highest line will drop every now and again if you know that the ball's getting played into that midfielder where it's suicidal just to stand there. You have to drop at some point. There are triggers and understandings. Again, that's stuff that comes with time. You'd like a lot of time on the training ground. As a defender at heart, it sometimes pains me to watch.
I mean, we first saw it deployed, John.
I'd rather have a nil.
We first saw it deployed, John. I think you've got to say properly at Chelsea in that home game, which was probably many would say it was a game where everything's come crashing down and gone absolutely wrong.
But
the game where I started to believe.
Yeah, I mean, they got applauded. Listen, they got applauded. John, we laughed about this 12 months ago. They were being applauded off at 4-1. Almost like it was an unbelievable moment in Ange's time at the club. Everyone stayed towards the end. You had Kulusevski coming out saying this is life. I think he used that quote. But the more you look at it, I mean, I can't lie. It is crazy to think that can work sustainably. Just on the basis that, for me, the problem is, John, you can, like we saw against Newcastle, dominate a game, create 20 plus shots, and you've got to. For me, the high line is that if somebody just switches off for just a second, like Matt said, the whole thing comes crashing down. I mean, was this a familiar trait that you saw in terms of the previous clubs he was at? Did he always deploy this high line?
I think it's all rooted in what we've talked about before previously and have written about and people have spoken to me about repeatedly. By the way, I've got a whole section in the book on that game just because it was so crazy. To pick out in games of moment. I'm
surprised Johnny wasn't the book that game the way it was.
Just do one book on that defensive formation, but it goes back to this philosophy: don't just beat the best team, but be the best team. So he thinks he should be able to build a team who are perfect, as near as perfect as you get in an imperfect game like football, where everyone is switched on and you're totally controlling and you're totally dominant, and then it doesn't matter if you're playing a high line. Because you're constantly, we'll come back to it, the out of possession work is so good. Your pressing is so good. And that's not just work rate. And it's a real pain when people talk about pressing or they don't run hard enough to press. It's about being coordinated. So knowing that when one presses, the next guy knowing exactly where he needs to be, not just how far he needs to run or how hard he needs to run, but knowing exactly where he needs to be. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see whether it changes or not. And you can pick, I mean, that was a particularly insane game, the Chelsea game, and it was a particularly crazy set of circumstances where he went, well, how do we reduce the space available to them? Well, this is how we'll do it. We'll play a high line to take away all that space instead of dropping deep. But you could take a snapshot from different games at different times and find something entirely different. You would think it would become more popular, though, in the kind of age of VAR and semi-automated offside and everything. You just, well, take your chance. Play that high line. I don't know.
a misrepresentation of that game, which I really, really dislike, is when people say, but we lost 4-1. It was terrible. It didn't work at all. We lost 4-1. 2 of those goals came in injury time when we were pushing for an equaliser. From the moment that Destiny Udogie got sent off up until Nicholas Jackson eventually converting what felt like his 16th absolute sitter, that entire part of the game, we depended on the quality of Vicario. And I dislike when some people say that you can't rely on the individual quality of players. You absolutely can. You spent the money on them. You know what they can do. Of course, you have to rely on the individual quality of players. Vicario did that for the vast majority of the game. There were a number of offsides. There were times when Mickey van de Ven, well, it was not him, he was injured, but those centre-backs recovered very well and managed to keep us in the game until eventually the 85th minute, Chelsea scored. We were a hair's width away from equalising. In the 90th minute, when Eric Dyer put it in the back of the net. I just think I had to get that off my chest, because it wasn't a 4-1 game when we were trying to hold on to what we had. It was when we put everything forward to get the equaliser is when Jackson completed the worst hat-trick in Premier League history.
and that's hence why you saw that reaction at the end, Matt, because everyone was really proud of the team for the way in which they did manage that last 15, 20 minutes. And it goes back to, again, I mean, I know Opta Sport absolutely loved that final 15, 20 minutes. Again, it kind of resonated. I think you want in a manager in terms of being able to be fearless and believing in his team. You mentioned, John, that you think he may adapt. Do you feel that will have to come fairly soon, given the nature that it's not the first, second, third time that we've seen Spurs players just not being able to, we've lost John there for a second, be able to withstand that line? We'll let Matt come in on that question. Oh, John is back. It is like watching Spurs' defence. They're there, they're not. They're there, they're not.
Yeah, do they change it? I don't know. It's. I get the feel, he's a master at flipping things around as well. I remember Thomas Broik played because he was a kind of forwardy type number 10 player, and he remembers the defenders had given a goal away, and he turned round and slaughtered the strikers. Basically, said, "Where the hell were you? Why weren't you offering that out ball?" So, he may just flip it entirely on his head and say, "Well, this problem starts with our front three.
Right?
If we are better here, that just doesn't happen." And then the occasion you mentioned Mickey there. I mean, if the occasion then if you've got him there, what a cheat code he is, isn't it? I mean, you can still play that highlight as long as then all you're not even needing the strikers or the wingers to stop the ball going forward. You're just getting to make some kind of effect so that it's not as accurate. It's not the fully picked pass. If you can just rush the pass, Vicky's going to sort it out for you. You should have good enough players, and he'll work on it. He's signed guys specifically. I mean, he signed him.
Yeah.
And it was like as soon as he signed him, you're like, well, I think this guy might be interesting. And then you saw his pace and thought, holy crap, what is he? Where's he got? And everyone knew how good he was, but again, you're not going to leap to this level this quickly.
I think that's the key, John. You say that there certain pads have been signed specifically, so when he hasn't got the likes of a Solanke or a Mickey van de Ven, that's where it does feel like the formation that he wants to play is really being limited then and being restricted because he doesn't have those players available. And I think that is where, again, as fans, this could be such a different start to the season, because you could be sitting there with 9 points out of 9 if you have Solanke, if you have Mickey van de Ven, it could be so different. But I think the problem is, it's like, John, you're seeing the same continual error time and time again, and it feels like we can dominate a game, but if there's one moment that in that one moment is going to completely destroy the work you're doing, how much longer can you keep going with that? So it really is fascinating stuff. What we are going to do, we are going to fit in our first break of the show for our listeners and audio. We've got over 3,000 of you watching us live. As always, thank you so much for all your incredible support for Last One on Spurs. I'm joined by my co-host over there, Matty Hayes, back alongside me. Your dream team is in the house, and we're joined by the wonderful John Greechan, of course, the author of Ange Postecoglou, that book that everyone remembers. They're still everybody buying it now. That new edition is out, of course, where we'd like to have John on, of course, that book, The Man, the Methods, and the Mastery. And John, just remind us, for those that haven't bought the book yet, want to buy the book, where can they buy this latest edition, John? Well,
I'm not sure if it's at Amazon yet, but you can get it through Berlin, the publishers, and it should be available in bookshops by now. I got a WhatsApp from the Spurs assistant, Nick Montgomery, when they were out in Seoul, wandering through his local bookshop and found the Korean edition. He sent me a photo of it.
Wow.
To say, mate, you've made it. So, got to go to the publishers, find out about the royalties. Where did they go?
Listen, we've got some praise for Nick in a bit, so we'll be talking to you about Nick in just a second. We most certainly will do. I have to ask you, John, I touched upon earlier about Ange cutting a frustrated figure on the touchline, and you mentioned the fact that maybe the biggest frustration for him is players not maybe following through with their tasks. And to be fair, look, we have seen that at least twice in that Newcastle game alone in the first half. We had Sonny flashing dangerous balls across the box from left to right. Nobody was there. Johnson did the same from the right flank really after the break with Son and Odegaard guilty of failing to attack the 6-yard box. And you know what? It's funny because there was a training video that came out from Spurs, I'd say a week before that, where Postecoglou Spurs are coached to, of course, send that low cross across the 6-yard box. And what you can hear on that video for those that didn't catch it at the time is that don't even look, bam, every time, the corner of that box, that's your target. And that's what Ryan Mason is actually reiterating to the players in that recently released training footage. But, I think this is the thing where when the players aren't doing the job that they're meant to be doing, that's where we go back to that point of just how frustrating it is for Ange. Is that down to coaching? Is it down to getting better players? What do you think will be going through his mind when he's seeing this week after week that the players just simply aren't following the instructions that he's telling us to?
We'd be looking for someone that does it. And that's all. You're just looking through the squad and saying, put your hand up, who's going to be the guy? And you mentioned that flashing across the 6-yard box. I mean, geez, anyone who watched Celtic under his time, Kyogo just feasted on it. As soon as the ball went, so they'd play it in and around the edge of the box, it would go through that final third entry area. Kyogo was there because he knew. He just ran for the box. And you're right, didn't even look. Ran for the box. This ball's coming across and I'm going to score. And just bang, 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 bang. Now, we've all seen players over the years. You'd love a Clive Allen, wouldn't you? That even before your time, you'd love.
I remember Clive. A little bit remember Clive. Listen. I look back
or
now.
Lineker.
Lineker. Yeah, Klinsmann. Klinsmann would be lovely.
The Fox. They're just a guy who lives in that area. That's his office.
Yep.
And that's kind of what you need. So yeah, you just got to look around and find it. Unless you put Sonny back there, because he did a very good job. So probably because he's such a good pro, he would, he takes the instruction really well. Yeah.
Now, I have to admit, the next question Matt's going to ask is going to, I think, how can I put this politely? This one is going to, I think, raise a few eyebrows because, you know what, there's certain things about facts and stats that you can't get away from. And it is an eye-opener. So, Matt, I'll hand over to you because I know this is going to maybe prompt some interesting reaction, both for viewers on audio and for those that are watching the show live.
Yeah, and I think, we've spoken so much about the methods and the process that goes into all of this, but at the end of the day, the results is what Ange Postecoglou will be graded on. And unfortunately, John, you are probably aware that how bad the stats out there are at the moment. Tottenham have taken 15 points from our last 13 Premier League games. We've actually only won 13 league games out of the last 31. 10 of those wins came against teams below 10th in the table. We've only beaten one top 10 side since the 10th of December, which was that big 4-0 victory at Villa Park in the latter stage of last season. To look at a smaller, more recent pool, Tottenham have only won 5 of the last 14 league games. All 5 wins were against bottom 5 teams. That's Everton and Nottingham Forest. And last season's 3 relegated teams in Sheffield United, Burnley and Luton Town. In addition to this, many teams are often judged based on how good their away form is. And I think every viewer and listener will remember the Pochettino away form. The last 11 months, we didn't have a win. Currently, we've lost 4 of our last 6 away Premier League games, winning 1 and drawing 1, which is more than the first 15 on the road under Ange Postecoglou combined, where we won 6, drew 6 and lost 3. Including only 3 wins away from home in their last 15 away fixtures, in addition to keeping just 4 clean sheets from the last 32 matches. The away form since December 28th, which goes back to the win against Nottingham Forest. We've played 12, won 2, drawn 4, lost 6, only 2 clean sheets, and conceded 2+ goals per game in at least 8 of the fixtures. Without the opening 10-game honeymoon form of last season, we would have finished 11th. Now, there's a lot of numbers there and quite a lot to process. But can you remember a time in his career when the form of his team was of this nature? And can you remember, if so, how he managed to turn it around?
Yeah, it's always been slightly different. You say take away that opening 10-game honeymoon form. Usually that came later for him. So he would, they would start terribly and then go on this run. So it's just been a little bit different. And you can use these, you can't say take away that opening 10-game run and you'd finish 11th. I mean, take away the final month of the season and you finish 4th. All right. So it's like there's what these statistics, and I was grateful for you sending them over to me earlier as well. It brilliantly illustrates how tough the Premier League is. It's brutal. And I mean, most Spurs fans would still say last season was kind of encouraging, mostly encouraging. It wasn't the worst season they've had.
No.
And yet, when you look at those stats, you've got to compare it to the other teams around about in the league, and it is bad that you're not getting wins. And I think the inability to beat the bigger teams becomes an issue. That does become an issue for fans, because as much as you're talking about where you're sitting in the table and all that, it kind of goes on emotion and vibes. So I hate that word. Everyone's using it, vibes, but doesn't it? So, the derbies are always important. You're playing against Liverpool. These are the games that people are going to remember for a long, long time. So I get the importance of that, definitely, and I think he'll understand that as well.
It is one of those things where, John, you look again. I always say that point: stats and facts don't lie. And again, what I will just say in between this is that you can see definitely at the start of this season with Tottenham, there's no doubt about it. There's been a progression, in my opinion, on the football. You can't disagree with that. In the first 3 games, Spurs have looked better. They've played better. I don't see any lack of desire from any player out there. I see players that maybe are a bit unsure about what they may be doing. That decision making in the final third is definitely a problem. But I know it's hard to ask you this because, again, you wrote the Bad's great book. When do you think those results generally start to become a big, big problem for Tottenham? Because I do agree that when you look at, for me, I think away form is so crucial to any team. It tells you a lot about a side that can go away from home and consistently pick up big, big results. And to be fair to Ange, what I will say is I would say dating back probably to, Burnley under Pochettino, where he absolutely lost his rag. I think I'm going back here, Matt. You might have to help me on the year. 2019, Matt? Please forgive me. 2019. Spurs' away form generally since Pochettino in 2019 has been quite horrific. So it's not actually all on Ange. It is a big problem with Tottenham in terms of the away form. But I think it's highlighted even more, John, when you look at, like I say, the stats around they've only beaten one team in the top 10 since December 2023. It's hard to get away from those stats. When do you think, and there is fans at the moment, I've got to say, to bring balance to the show, there are fans that maybe right now would be open to a change. I think, it's 3 games in. You've got to give the guy, in my opinion, at least to the end of the season before we change again. Because, Spurs have done this so many times. They've always already deviated away from the plan when they've had a strategy, which they seem to have under Ange. He's been spent and been given a lot of money so far. When do you think the serious questions start coming, John?
I think probably some people are asking them already, as you point out. And this is why we love football. It might not work out. And now if someone's written the book on the guy, so you go, well, that's kind of awkward to say that at times, and someone who knows a couple of people involved with him, that would be, but it might not work simply because football's mental. It's a game of chaos. Things could go wrong. You have a horrendous run of form and bad luck and dodgy VAR decisions and everything else, and you end up sitting 14th. And then and then there's always one result, isn't there? There's always one. There's always a bad one, a 3-0 at home or something that does for you. You try and get credit in the bank before that. That's all any manager's trying to do. Get credit in the bank, so that when the inevitable bad day comes, you're not getting emptied right away. So, listen, you guys all know the Premier League scene. More than that, you guys know your club better than anyone, right? This is the whole point. I always said this for years working as a sports writer. When you talk to the fans of the local team, because you would see Spurs once, every 6 weeks or something.
Yeah.
And you go, the guys that are there every week have a deep understanding, not just of how the team's playing, how individual players are doing, what the coach looks like on the touchline all the time, but the mood out there. And it's not always reflected on social media, and it's not always reflected on, 606 or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's really fair. I think, like I say, again, many might feel that I've been, at times, certainly this season, the back in the last season, quite harsh on the man. I think what I've remained consistent for me is that going into the second season, I want to see lessons being learned. I want to see progress. I want to see the team moving forward. And I think the key thing for me, what I've seen in those first 3 games, is that the players are listening. They certainly are. We're playing a better brand of football than in the back in the last season, where I was questioning really where are we going to some degree. But I can also sit here and say that I think we've been really unlucky to not be going into this international break 9 points out of 9. And the irony is, John, when I look back 12 months ago, I don't know if you agree, Matt, and maybe Matt can come in on this, I think that we played better in these opening 3 games. We played in the opening 3 under Ange last season, and we were unbeaten, and was it 7 points out of 9, Matt? So it's funny how football works, that there's this mood now, but when you contrast the opening 3 performances this season against last season, I think we're playing better now. Would you agree, Matt?
Yeah, and I'm going to use the buzzword that I've used on here all summer: progress. I made that point on social media as well the other day, that yes, you can look at the fact that we're 3 points worse off than we were at this stage last season, but the first 3 games of a season, the results aren't going to give you the bigger picture. The way that we're playing and the nature of our performances is going to give you the bigger picture, and we're creating much more. As you're looking at those stats, we have more shots, more XG, more high quality possession in the opposition half. We're doing a lot more with the ball. The problem is just the most important thing, putting the ball in the back of the net. And on game day, that's one of the few things that Ange Postecoglou can't really impact from the sideline. Yes, he can do his finishing work on the training ground, and he can work on different ways of creating opportunities on the pitch. We've seen from the videos that is something that Tottenham are doing. But for me, I absolutely agree with you, Ricky. The football that we're playing now is so much better. And when I say good football, I'm talking about the quality of our chances, the quality of our possession, the level of control that we have on games. It is much better than it was at this stage last season.
When you look back, that's a snapshot there that we've got there that kind of gives you an indicator. And for fair balance, that we gave you the stats of how bad it is, but in terms of form. But when you look at the Premier League this season for Tottenham, their shots on target, second in the league on 20. Possession on average, it's first at 68.9. Touched in the opposition box, 145, being first. Big chances created, they're 8th on that. They've created 7. And expected goals, it's 4.87, and they're 7th on that. I mean, when you look at those stats, that's not a stats of a side that are struggling mid-table, bottom half of form. That's a side that looks like they're progressing. So you'd like to think, John, throwing it back to you, that if they do have the likes of a Mickey van der Ven fully fit and a Dominic Solanke fully fit, that should maybe give encouragement to fans that hopefully the results will come. This is just hopefully a bedding in period that everything tells you, based on, like I say, that snapshot of the season, it will come. Is that how you feel when you look back at previous clubs under Ange, or is it honestly too hard to tell?
I think you just look at the track record, and that's all anyone can do in football. You're judging people's past records and trying to project it into the future. That goes whether you're scouting players or you're hiring managers. And I've heard it described a couple of times as when you're hiring managers like Hollywood rules, which is in Hollywood, nobody knows anything. So a guy who makes a hit with a small budget picture suddenly gets given $1 billion and told to make a blockbuster. So, and it's a little bit like that in football. But you would like to think of a guy of his age, in his late 50s now, been through the course, achieved success in different environments, that we talked about the credit in the bank. Now, he knows that what he did in Australia didn't count much when he went to Japan, and what he did in Japan didn't count much when he went to Scotland, and what he did in Scotland counted for nothing when he went to Spurs. He knew that. But at some point, you do have to look at a guy's body of work and say, well, he's faced all of these problems before. And yes, this is a tougher league, but he's also got better players than he's ever clapped eyes on to be able to play for him before. So he's got the tools when they're fit, when Van der Ven's there, when Solanke in particular is back.
And this is what goes back to me what I said earlier, John, this is a guy that's told us he wants to win the Premier League. And yet here we are relying on certain players. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying City, Arsenal, Liverpool don't rely on certain players. But my worry is for Tottenham, you take out 2 or 3 players from that side. Suddenly, like we saw Chelsea last season, Matt, if you agree as well, a couple of injuries, and it all completely changes the picture of what Spurs can field, how they can play. And it goes back to what we said before about the high line, trying to, use that to your advantage, trying to play in a certain way where you can bring Romero further up the pitch and not switch off. So I think that makes it very fascinating. It's one, obviously, of course, we don't have the answers for now. We certainly have to wait and see. And Matt, please come back in there for me. I can see Richard to come back in.
Yeah, I think that point you made about the, if we do have a couple of injuries, that the last season there was such a huge drop off. I think that's one of the most important defenses, I'd say, of our transfer business this summer. And I don't think it needs a defense. As I said a few weeks ago, the business we did was really good. It's the business that perhaps we didn't do that is going to be our downfall this season, if there is a downfall. But this idea that every signing needs to improve the starting 11, it's just not true when you're at the level of the first team that Tottenham have. Like, we can't sign, we're not going to find a defender to improve that back four right now. We can sign good defenders. Anyone that would improve that back four costs way too much money and isn't going to come to a team that's playing in the Europa League. The midfield, it's a much more dynamic area of the pitch, of course, and especially under Postecoglou in different games, he's going to need different things from them. So I don't think it's necessarily smart to go into the window and say, we have Bissouma, let's buy someone better, because there's no point in that starting 11 being better. If you bring in one of the best in the world and you lose Bissouma, you're still left with the same backup. And like you said there, that was our downfall this season, rather than the actual quality of that starting 11. And with the physical demands that Ange puts on his players, both in training and in games, the fact that last season we played 41 matches and this season we're guaranteed a minimum of 48, that depth I think is going to be so much more important to us throughout the season, rather than those minimal incremental improvements we could have made in that starting 11.
Yeah, it's so true on that point. And, John, we talk about certain players that could be so pivotal. They've got the likes of Odegaard, Johnson, Kulusevski and Timo Werner there. And as it stands, talented but really inconsistent wide players lacking the game-changing qualities of a Son, who you'd say is probably only the genuine world-class forward in there. I'm not trying to age Son, but he's not going to get any younger. I mean, we know Spurs are looking to that next potential Korean superstar, and of course, Min-hyuk, who we'll see from January. But, when you look at the fact that they've had a real failure to convert territory and dominance into clear-cut chances and putting the ball in the back of the net, you go back to earlier, like you said, Richarlison is that player you'd like to see you feature to come and do that job, but obviously he's been injured. So it does feel like that Dominic Solanke, despite only just playing the once for the football club, he seems to have grown massively in these two games that he hasn't played, which is so unique about football, right? Every player becomes either better or important when they're not playing. How much do you think, John, for you, the season relies heavily on a Dominic Solanke profile of player? Because crucial to the way Ange wants to play in terms of that pressing game, where he's got the best pressing stats in the Premier League as a centre forward, which made Spurs buy him, and also does offer you some help defensively as well.
Yeah, I think he's huge. It becomes very obvious just looking from the outside that Ange wanted and pursued him, pressed to get him. And he's always very, very clear on what he wants from players. He's not vague when he's looking for. So if he's looking for that number 9, he's not vague and, well, I could take a guy like this or I could take a guy like that. He knows exactly what he wants from it. And I think I interviewed one of his old teammates who now gives advice as a head of a recruitment company, who, with major banks and insurance companies and engineering people are trying to headhunt, recruit. That's his job. And he uses insight from Ange when he's addressing conferences all over the world. He said this because the most important thing is to have a clarity of thought about what you want, and not a box, but a clarity of thought. You need to know what this guy can and cannot do, and that's why you're going for him. So we see it. You see it in football. I always love when clubs are without a manager and they interview 4 different guys and they're 4 completely different types of managers. And you go, well, you would never do that in any other industry in the world. You would have a job description that tells you must have this and this is desirable. These are your absolute certainties and desirable. And he's like that with his players. He's very much so. He's not going to go, well, I could take a big target man, but I could just get a fox in the box. Okay. He's had it very, very clear in what he wants. His non-negotiables, his absolute must that he needs. Solanke clearly fits that for him. I never thought Richarlison looked like an Ange player. Just didn't. And I don't know, sometimes that is just a feel thing. He doesn't look as if he fits in that team. But Solanke does. Solanke looks as if he will fit in that team, that he'll get the goals. As you say, set the press really well. And that's not just about running, that's about the game intelligence and everything else he brings to it as well.
And I've got to say, Matt, back to that point, I'm sure you agree with me, Matt. This is a guy that we understand last season didn't even miss a training session for Bournemouth. Comes to Tottenham, and he's injured in the first 2 games. Can you make that up, Matt? Can you make that up?
He's got that Tottenham DNA. What more could we ask for in a player? But you mentioned the recruitment there, John, and one of Ange's most recent recruits off the pitch is, of course, as already mentioned in the show, new coach Nick Montgomery. And his influence has already been clear to see on the pitch with Tottenham's set pieces, both defensive and attacking, seeing a lot of improvement this season, especially in that game against Newcastle. Very little got past the Spurs defence in the air from free kicks and corners. And we looked far more organised in our hybrid zonal and man-marking system, with weaker players in the air marking opposition midfielders rather than big defenders and attackers, which I know seems like a basic, but is something that has certainly been lacking in Tottenham's defending over the last couple of seasons. In Celtic's first season under Ange Postecoglou, the team did seem to struggle hugely from set pieces, but that appeared to improve greatly in the second season. Can you see that being the case with Spurs, especially now that Nick Montgomery is in and tasked with improving that?
Yeah, I find it interesting because when Nick was in charge of Spurs, Hibs last year, they had a real problem with set-piece goals, but he was not in charge of it. He was the manager, and he delegated it to other coaching staff. But I think he probably regrets that is one of the things. But if you're a manager, you can only do so many things. You're right to talk about that hybrid zonal and man marking system. I've spoken about it with Montgomery and other coaches at Hibs. That is what he liked, this idea. It's not getting too embedded in things. It's also, I think he's quite flexible in dealing with what you're up against that week. You know, we know what we're going to have to deal with. I mean, everyone works on these things. The rise of set piece specialists, you know, Austin McPhee is the Villa one in Scotland as well. I know him. It's become like an arms race. Everyone wants to try and analyse the nth degree, and everyone's got a new plan every week. You know, you can guarantee the first corner in a Premier League game, you know, there's going to be something interesting here, because you're bringing your best play, aren't you? You're bringing your number one play, your first serve, as it were. Whatever it is, that's what you're bringing. So I think they recognise the importance of it. The interesting thing is, if knowing the people involved well enough, if Monty doesn't get it right, you'll be getting told about it. And you'll be kicking him up the arse and say, "What are you doing to me?" So,
John, describe him as a character.
Monty just accept that anyway.
I expect to say, John, you know him fairly well. Describe Monty as a character to us, just to give us a bit of an insight as to what Spurs have got as their assistant coach. How would you sum him up?
Yeah, it's a top bloke. He's very much a Yorkshireman. Even though he won caps for Scotland, Scotland A or Scotland B, and Scotland under 21. You remember with Sheffield United, a hard as nails kind of midfield battler, went around crushing people. You probably don't mind me saying that. He's actually quite an inexperienced manager, and that he'd only managed at Central Coast when he got the Hibs job. He probably got treated fairly badly there in the end. He was, told to come in, bring the age of the squad down, revolutionise everything, and we'll go through 3 transfer windows and we'll get it all right. And then it goes wrong. They miss out in the top 6 in the last minute of a game, and okay, you're out. So, but he's an interesting character. He's a football, like Ange, a football obsessive. He's really wedded to the idea of, again, playing and dominating. He'll talk about it now. If you ask him now, he says, yeah, who else went to Celtic Park in Ibrox and had that amount of possession and played out the back successfully as often as we did? Now they lost these games, because most teams do when they go to Celtic Park now. They just do. But they went and played a different way. So he's very much simpatico to what Ange wants to do. And he was super excited to get the gig with Ange. And, the chance to work with someone, not just the chance to work at Spurs, the chance to work with players of that quality, backroom staff of that quality, but the chance to learn from Ange, just like, he was positively, can a Yorkshireman be giddy? I'm not sure if that's allowed. But he was quite excited about it.
Would it be fair to say the criticisms that were levelled against Montgomery in his time at Hibs, especially last season, were similar to the ones that we've levelled against Ange Postecoglou? I say we as the general Tottenham fan base over the last year. And it's interesting that you mentioned the set piece issue that he had, even though it was something he delegated. But in terms of dominating games without creating enough to win games, is that a fair comparison to make?
They scored goals last year. They weren't having a problem scoring goals. It was keeping them out of the other end that was the issue, mainly. But he inherited an incredible mixed bag of players because they'd changed managers. Was it 4 managers in 3 and a bit years or something?
Who does it sound like that? Who does it sound like?
Chelsea, Watford. Can't think of anyone else.
It was insane. I mean, they've literally just cleared out loads of players and brought in 11 new ones. So they're going to have to stick with the current manager for a while because you can't, you couldn't do it again
We do keep saying this about Tottenham, though, John. They still keep changing, so I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It's but no, he's very much in tune with it. He's just a clever football guy as well. I in my role out here, and I got to spend a lot of time with him, just sitting in his office chatting football. And as a coach and as a tactician and analyst, I just loved getting into the nitty gritty of what you do when you're defending without the ball in a 4-4-2, and where do you do that? Why is he sitting there? What's his position? What's his role there? And he's incredibly happy to go into just detailed stuff about it. And
have you spoke to him, John, since he's obviously become head assistant at Spurs? Is he enjoying it? Do you know? Is he enjoying it?
Yeah, he's absolutely loving it. Absolutely loving every minute of it. And he was sitting next to Ange when they got drawn against Rangers in the Europa League.
Okay.
Yeah, he's like, oh well, we're having a bit of a laugh about this. It's like so. Yeah, and I think he enjoyed coming back to Tynecastle with Spurs as well and playing Hearts.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating stuff. It really, really is. And great to get a little bit of insight there as well, I've got to say. Look, it's funny you bring it onto that about Europe and Rangers, because Spurs are preparing for an exciting trip, it's fair to say, on this coming season back into Europe for Spurs. And look, I think being in Europe for the club is always special. And they've got some really tasty ties, of course, to come for Spurs. They'll take on the likes of Roma, Alkmaar, Karabag, Elfsborg, but they've got obviously those trips to Rangers, Ferencváros. I've got to try and get that right before we play them. Galatasaray and Hoffenheim do away. I mean, Galatasaray away is certainly going to be an interesting place to go. Of course, they've just signed, Osimhen for the Turkish Giants on loan. I mean, I think it's fair to say, John, you've actually been quite honest about this. We've brought you on previously that the one criticism of Ange at Celtic was probably his lack of success when it came to taking the club into Europe. And I'd be interested to know, do you think he would have learned from his travelling experiences there when it comes to taking Spurs into Europe? Because, again, this is not to put pressure, but I think we all are expecting a fairly decent run in this Europa League. And it's not always great to quote the bookies, or you look at the bookies' odds. Spurs are one of the favourites for the Europa League. And for a man that, with all due respect, maybe didn't perform greatly in Europe with Celtic, what are you expecting this time around with him at Spurs?
I think they're probably right to be favourites. I mean, one of the big English clubs should always be favourites for this competition. He was probably, the European thing was incredible for Ange at Celtic, in that, going to Santiago Bernabeu and playing Real Madrid and just having a go at them and losing. We always have this debate in Scotland whether our champions are probably better off going into the Europa League at some point. I mean, the money at the Champions League is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Whereas the standard of football is also ridiculous. You can get a real hiding. And the question was, if Ange stayed again, the question was, well, will he then adapt? Will he adapt to, if they were going into the Champions League, will they adapt and change the way they play and be a bit more pragmatic? I think we all know the answer to it. It's probably no. He doesn't have to do that in the Europa League. They're going to have strength. They're going to have so much strength. I mean, you talk about that and everyone gets excited about that. Oh, the trip to Rangers, and it'll be a Battle of Britain thing. And Rangers are a bit of a basket case at the moment. They got turned over with ease by Celtic at the weekend. They'll finish second simply because maybe not. Aberdeen are having a good crack at it this year. So I wouldn't get too obsessed about that one. He'll love that. He'll love going there. I mean, also, you remember he had Rangers in his pocket when he was Celtic.
Yeah.
He had figured out pretty much, with one exception one game I remember where they didn't, and it was kind of over, and it was already out of there, and Celtic were missing a couple of players. But yeah, so he's when you look at that group, you should be expecting to go. You should be. He'll want to win it. Of course, you will. And listen, we talked about this before. I mean, geez, I remember Archibald and 84 was it? 84.
84.
Yeah, I was just a nipper. But I remember, that's the kind of thing that you become immortal, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's legends of this football club, the likes of Graham Roberts, of course, Mickey Hazard, Tony Parks. It's been so long, John, obviously, without that trophy. That's why I think many look at the Europa League as a potential winnable competition, because Jason McGovern, bless him, I love Jason. We say this a lot about, it was on with Jason before, John, that, when you look at the domestic cups, Spurs, in all likelihood, are going to have to probably face one of City, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, Man United to get past to win that cup. And the reality is that it's not easy when you're playing those English sides. And I think, look, don't get me wrong, there's no easy game in Europe. I've always said that. I think Europe, you've got some teams in there that are perennial regulars in Europe that are just accustomed to that football. And Spurs, let's be honest about it, that Champions League one was absolutely incredible under Maurizio Pochettino. I mean, bearing in mind, Matt, we were out of it twice, quite literally, and we thought our way back. And I just wonder, I mean, Matt, on that point, how important do you think the European games will be, Matt, to get some momentum into the season? Because we spoke about the away form earlier. You know, it's fair to say that you're not going to get more challenging places to go, the likes of Galatasaray away. I mean, John, we have that joke there about Rangers, but I don't think Rangers away is going to be an easy game. I think that's going to be a game where that's a big, big game. Both clubs will be up for it, Matt. Do you agree?
Yeah, we speak a lot about certain cup draws that we have, and I don't want to mention this in front of you, Ricky, so block your ears, but Colchester in 2019 and different games that we've had since then, it's a huge day for these teams when there is one of the big six, if you still want to call them that, coming to your stadium. But when you're, you know, a Galatasaray or a Rangers, it's much less often that you get one of the big English teams coming to play you. So it's a massive massive occasion for them. And Rangers, of course, will have the added inspiration or motivation, I should say, of Ange Postecoglou coming there. And the best way I can put it about our Europa League draw is each individual game there is a winnable game and one that we arguably should win. But when you put all 8 of them together, that's not an easy task at all. And you add that, of course, onto the Premier League campaign, the Thursday, Sunday slog that we all absolutely hate. But being successful in that competition is going to be very important, because I think last season, on the balance of the season, the football that we played, we should have qualified for the Champions League, and we can pick out straight off the top of my head the Villa and West Ham games at home where it was 0 points that should have been 6, and that puts us 4 ahead of Villa at the end of the season. We arguably should be in the Champions League now. So in my eyes, we're a Champions League squad playing Europa League football. You don't have the teams dropping down from the Champions League this season.
Yep.
It's a very, very winnable competition, and I think Ange has put a lot more pressure on himself by saying, in my second season, I usually win things. Whether that's true or not, saying it as publicly as he did is going to put more pressure on him. So I think that will be incredibly important. And it's been a debate long in the Spurs fan base about whether cup success or league form is more important. I think for Ange this season, unequivocally, the Europa League and the FA Cup is going to be more important than where we finish in the league. But of course, with the eternal caveat that getting to the final and losing is the worst thing you can do. You know, you'd rather be out in the group stage than go through the entire season with that slog. We need to win one of those competitions in my eyes.
Yeah, I asked you earlier, John, actually, on that point about the fact that he was quite, use the word bullish, but again, this was what was printed in paper. So I can't use the word bullish because this is what apparently he said to the papers, that, you know, in my second season, I usually win something. Is that out of tone? Is that consistent with what he's like at his previous clubs when he's that honest about what he actually sees? Because look, he's had success wherever he's gone. He's come to a club that admittedly, maybe you can tell me, but you're better than me on this, John, but obviously he had success in Japan where that was not the case for that club for a very, very, very long time. I wouldn't say, is it fair to tell us that he usually wins something to a club that hasn't won something for about 20, 25 years? What do you think on that?
I think he's just very honest about what he wants and what he achieves, and he likes setting the high standards. And that's a message not just to fans and the public. That's to the players as well, isn't it? That's setting your stall out pretty early. You know, you're coming here, you're here now, and you're going to be part of this. We're going to win something. And I'll come back to it again, regardless of the start. He will think that they are capable of winning the Premier League title. So as much as I love a cup, and I'm with you on that. I think the League Cup, the FA Cup, magic. The Europa League, just those things are fantastic. But he'll want to win the league. And I don't see why I think he's got to the stage of his life, like, why be coy about it?
Mm-hmm.
Not as if he's got another 30 years in management. He's just kind of like, mate, I want to win everything, okay? So let's do it. And he has done it. And he's done it, and he's usually done it with clubs. I mean, people forget what a state Celtic were in when he took over as well. This is what everyone goes, well, you're Celtic, you won things at Celtic, because anyone can win things at Celtic. Well, you know, they were in a state, and he had to rebuild them and bring them back up again. Admittedly, it's not as tough a league. but there was a tough spell at the start. Japan, yeah, you pointed out, he did it. Brisbane was unheard of what he did. He's been around the block long enough, and I think he loses patience with the idea of why have some sort of false modesty about it and pretend that we'll see how we go and maybe we'll be all right and we'll show progress from last year and all the mealy mouth stuff that a lot of managers saying is like, no mate, I want to win things.
Listen, I've always said, I think in this period now, it's about turning those doubters certainly into believers. And at this next game, I think that if he wins this, I think that does get a lot. I wouldn't say everything's on this next game because that's silly in football. It shouldn't be like that. But there's a certain thing about rivalry that, John, like you said earlier, he had Rangers in his back pocket to some degree. And we've got, obviously, as you know, a very important game coming next for any Spurs fan this season. Arsenal are coming to town. It's a big London derby. I think many of us, we can't get away from the fact of the progress that Arsenal have made under Mikel Arteta. And many, I think, look at that model that Arsenal have done by backing him, by sticking with him. I think it was 8th. And then they obviously had that rise up the table. I think many look at Spurs and think, why shouldn't we look to follow that same model? But again, it's each to their own. Everybody's got their own opinions of how that is. But I think it's fair to say that put an impressive performance and get a result in that derby, that could be the kickstart for Spurs this season. Struggle against the local rivals, and I do fear that the grumbles will be going around how this campaign has started and the mixed results. So it's a bit of, again, the $1 million question to ask you here, John. How big a game do you think this could be in Spurs this season and in Ange Postecoglou's time at the football club?
Yeah, interesting. I thought you were going down the same road there. I remember Glenn Hoddle once. We went out to Spurs Lodge on a Friday and he said, yeah, we should be more like Arsenal. I was like, mate, can't say that.
I can't say that.
Manager.
No, I mustn't say that. But I mean, you have to admire them, John. For look, as much as they are bitter rivals, they have stood by a man that was actually under massive pressure by their own fans at that football club. And I hate to say they're reaping the success of it now. They've not won anything Premier League wise, but you can see, again, taking the biased hat off, they are consistently getting better and better season upon season.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting. We chatted before we went on air about this game. I think it's, in some ways, it's a better matchup for Spurs, though, just in the way they play and their style. I think it will be an interesting game. I think this baffled me towards the end of last season when there was that argument about whether you wanted to beat Arsenal because Man City, Man City, was it the Man City thing to Arsenal win the league and he didn't care? And it was like, I mean, how did you, mate, you were in Glasgow, right? You don't want your rivals to win a throw-in. Never mind a title. So yeah, it was the Man City game, wasn't it? And it was, do you want to win? Yeah, of course you want
very
to win.
Strange. Yeah, that was very strange.
But these derbies, he's been through plenty of them and he's understood them over the years. And I'm fascinated. Be tuning in. Well, maybe tuning in. I don't know. Yeah, depends where I am.
out of 10, John, how big a game is it out of 10? Is it hard to give it a rating out of 10? How big the game is?
It's 11. Goes all the way up to 11.
I'm going to steal that line that you don't want your rivals to win a throw-in. I'm going to use that way too much going forward. I do love it. The start of the season, John, as we've spoken about so far, has been strange, and it's brought more promise than results in the first period of the season with some of the old problems creeping back in, as we've discussed. Postecoglou, interestingly, is the first Spurs head coach to last the duration of a full season in 5 years since Mauricio Pochettino did it the year he reached the Champions League final. He's undertaken the biggest rebuild we've seen in years, that painful rebuild that Pochettino again warned us about in 2019. Do you think Postecoglou will get the time required to mould Spurs into the team that he wants them to be?
You're asking me to read Daniel Levy's mind now. Come on. That's a hard thing to do.
Listen, John, you're a multi-talented author. You're a brilliant journalist. We have to ask you the tough questions.
Sometimes I think it's like, at most football chairman mind, it's like that scene with Homer Simpson. You look at his brain, it's got a little monkey with the symbols. Nothing's going on in there apart from panic. And they're the guys that ultimately bear the results. So I get it. Listen, there's all these cases to be made, and you can't just keep, rinse and repeat. You can't do that. And everyone will always point to, and Man United stuck with Fergie for all those years. Yeah, but for every one of him, there was clubs that stuck with a guy a year too long and ended up relegated. So I think they should give him the time. You make the points yourselves when you look at what Arsenal done, you look at other clubs have done. Either you believe in it or you don't. If you believed he was the guy, he's not done anything out of character. It's not as if he's come in and changed it and suddenly you're going back to front ball, playing hoofball, and he's, and everything's gone completely crazy. He's doing exactly what you hire him to do. We come back to that Hollywood rules thing. You don't hire the guy who's an auteur as a filmmaker and ask him to make something big and dumb with explosions. If he's known for film noir, you're hiring him, that's what he's going to do. So he's doing what you thought he was going to do. If you don't stick with him, he's like, well, what did you expect to happen? What did you want? What more could I have done to be there? So that's my tuppence worth, Mr. Levy.
I like that. I mean, it's interesting, Matt. I mean, I don't know. In your mind, Matt, are we ahead or are we behind on the project since Ange has been appointed? We've probably never actually answered that question. Are we where we expected us to be, Matt?
I don't know where I expected us to be, quite frankly. And I was very vocal about it last summer that when with all the managers we were linked to, it was Arne Slot, and I spent a lot of time investigating, analysing, researching. I did an hour-long feature piece on my channel. I had the same prepared for Julian Nagelsmann and for the sporting manager Ruben Amorim, and by the time it got to Ange Postecoglou, I was tired and I gave up because I didn't know when the endless cycle of links was going to end. So he's not a manager I'd say I was overly knowledgeable on when he came in. Now, in the course of my work over the last couple of years, I did watch a lot of Celtic, I did watch a lot of the Scottish Premiership, and I knew the basics, the fundamentals of what he was about. But when you're going from win now managers in Jose and Conte with a bizarre fever dream of 6 months with Nuno Espirito Santo sandwiched in the middle, there's just so much work that needs to be done that I honestly couldn't even put a time frame on that in my head, how long it was going to take. What I will say is that we're playing football that I like to watch. We're signing players that I like to watch in the pitch as well. And I think the progress that we've made over the last 12 months has been substantial, but that's not enough. The last 12 months isn't enough to not have the same for the next 12 months, if that makes sense. This trajectory has to continue. And yep. I've often made the point about Arsenal giving the time to Mikel Arteta, as much as it pains all of us to say that maybe that's the model we need to follow. There's something to be said for giving managers time when it's a little bit difficult. And I've had people ask, how long would you give him this season? And that's an impossible question to answer because it depends on not just where we are in the table in 6 months' time, but it depends on the nature of how we've gotten there. Have we struggled with really bad injuries and are actually kind of playing good football, but the rub of the green hasn't been with us? Or are we playing our full strength team, controlling games, but still every game being caught out with one or two through balls? It's an impossible question to answer. But what I'd say is I'm still bought into this project. Maybe not as much as I was 6 months ago, but in football, all of these things ebb and flow. So if we win our next two games, if we beat Arsenal 4-0, I'll probably be the person screaming from the rooftops that he's bringing us the Champions League and Premier League double next season. So there are just so many fine little nuances within it all. But I'm happy with where the last 12 months has gone for sure.
John, the inquest is nearly over and you've been amazing. We love having you on this show. The poor guy writes a book and he's drawn into hung, drawn and quartered on a Spurs podcast. He probably didn't think it was going to come in his lifetime, the poor bloke. But look, we go back to that point, and Matt's alluded to it there. Look, Spurs did start like a train under Ange last season, only to fade as the injuries really hammered what you've got to say was a thin squad. Look, the reality of it all is that we should have had more points than what we are on at the moment. A couple of better decisions in front of goal. There's no doubt Spurs would be sitting on maximum points. It would have been 9 out of 9. But as we've said, they've got a bit of a mixed bunch in there. 1 win, 1 draw, 1 defeat. I'm not telling you, I'm not asking you to tell the fans how they should and want to feel, but how important do you feel it is, given the fact that you've seen Ange over the course of many years at many different clubs, that we should be sticking with the process and trusting in him based on the fact that wherever he's been and he's had difficult times, tell me if I'm wrong, he seems to have always come through them, John. Is that a fair point I'm saying?
I think so, yeah. I think also fans should never lose sight of the fact that winning matters to him. Winning is the ultimate thing for him. And it's the same thing if you go through players. I remember my great pal, Graham Hunter, when a young guy called Messi was coming through at Barca, and I was like, oh, is he? And he was like, goals. That's what makes the difference. He says not only is he the best at everything, he just loves scoring goals. And that's why he's going to be he's called it when he was 17. He's going to be the best of all time because he loves scoring goals. So there's like the best competitors have that, right? They don't just go, oh, well, we played well, we're nice. You need to win the game. You need to win the game. Not only that, particularly when it comes to this Arsenal game, you have to want the other guy to lose. And Ange has got that ruthless now. It's the will to conquer. Not just the will to win, the will to conquer. And he's definitely got that as part of him. That it's not just the Aussie thing, it's the son of Greek immigrant, want to show everyone, going right back to high school, I'll bloody show those Aussie kids, we're just as good as them, we're better than them. That is a deep, deep part of his psyche.
I think that's why, before Matt comes in there, that he has still got a lot of affection amongst the Spurs fan base, because they have seen his background, his character, his profile and his persona. And there's a lot of things Spurs like in him. At fans, I say, as a person, he is very honest. He talks to the fans. He doesn't tell fans how they should and want to feel. And I think that's one thing that I don't know if Matt agrees on that point. When we had the likes of Conte and Mourinho here, who are no doubt, look, in their own right, they were incredible managers that won unbelievable things in their career. But it did feel like they were almost looking at Spurs as they were beneath them. They were below them. That we were almost, doing them a favour, really, by having them here. And I think the one thing that Ange has definitely done throughout his time here, and however long that will be, is that he's never once, I think, spoken down to the fans. I think that, like you said earlier, John, and not to, again, put words in your mouth, I think there was a bit of a misalignment around the Arsenal game of last season. I think we've got past that now, or to say the Man City game of last season and what it would have meant for that title race. But I think we're past that now. And I think that's the one thing, Matt, he does still hold. I think if you agree, Matt, he's got a lot of affection from fans, and I think he will have a lot of time from fans because of those personal character traits that we haven't necessarily had in the previous two few managers. Probably going back to Poch, because Poch was very well liked at the time, and I think Ange is very well liked still.
I think it's incredibly interesting that the first manager we've had in a while who has said he's not going to tell the fans how to think, ironically, is a man who seems to think very much like the Tottenham fans in the way we see football and the values that we have in the game, which I think maybe is just a further correlation there between the mindsets of Ange and the fans. But even that one moment of maybe disagreement and discord, as we found out after the game against Manchester City, was more fueled by what happened behind the scenes. And I think there was a story about a coach that he had who made a joke in training or in the offices somewhere about wanting to, or the potential of throwing the game, and Ange unleashed at him in Hotspur way. And I think it is entirely plausible that might have fueled the way he went into that press conference. And it may even have been just him trying to convince us more than anything that isn't the right way to go about things. And we have a game of football, and for 90 minutes we have to want to win that game of football no matter what. But yeah, I completely agree with you that it's just really refreshing to have someone who, as he has said himself, grades his entire time at this club based on how the fans feel. And that is the way football should be, because football is for the fans, Daniel Levy. So it's fantastic that we have someone in the dugout who does feel like that. But on that point, John, I think it's a perfect time to ask, with the season ahead, what would you class as success for Ange Postecoglou in his second season? And on a personal note for him, do you think he needs to win something this season to stay motivated to continue at Tottenham?
I don't know if that's necessarily the thing to keep him motivated, but I think he'll want to fulfill the potential. We could come back to, he wants to win the Premier League. He's motivated. Again, one of his old colleagues said to me, he's motivated by a lot of hurt as well. Okay, so years of banging your head against a brick wall, born on the wrong side of the world, in a country where the sport was just played by immigrant kids and their parents and people that had the roots back in Europe. And he set himself this target at whatever, 10, 12 years old. I want to manage a World Cup. Like, who does that? Like the kid with Shoot Magazine, a 3-month-old copy of Shoot Magazine, wandering up and down, going like 2 buses or 2 trams into Melbourne to get it and bring it back. He was deeply, deeply embedded in that. He's already overachieved so much, but he just wants to win. He just wants to win things. I think he thinks, and that's, we come back to that, motivated by hurt, because he believes he can be the best coach in the world. Right? That's coming from one of his closest friends, closest confidants. He believes he can be the best coach in the world. If you're the best coach in the world, how do you prove that? Well, you go and win your league, first of all. And then if you're in the Premier League, you go and win the Champions League, don't you? Because so you've got the richest league in the world, probably the most competitive league, whatever you want to call it. I always hesitate to use greatest because there's too many differences. And then you go win the Champions League. So he'll want to win the league. It's as simple as that. I mean, again, I'm with you, Ricky, on this one. I think if you won the FA Cup and, a little cup double, FA Cup and the Europa League, it would just be, the dream of all dreams. And you'd be like, then you're a hero forever. But he'd still be annoyed if it meant finishing 5th. He'd be like, should have won it.
Yeah.
And I think it was after one of the Brisbane victories. I think their second grand final victory when they had won it, but they hadn't won the league or something. So it's a different system in the A-League where you go into playoffs. And the players were celebrating like mad. And he came in, he threw something down. He went, "Can't believe you guys are celebrating. You didn't even win the league this year. You've stolen this title. And you're frauds." And they all froze. And then he cracked up, and they realised he was joking with them. But they believed it for a second because they thought, this could be real because he's that driven. He's mad. They were genuinely worried about it for a minute.
Yeah, I've got to say, John, it's been a really fascinating show with you. I think for many out there that have really got their doubts, and I think people are right to their doubts. I think as Matt read those stats out earlier, you wouldn't be a human and a football fan if you didn't have doubts. But I think the one thing is that wherever he's been, whoever he's connected with, he has got that habit, John, of turning doubters into believers. And I think that's what he probably needs to do now. Is that fair, John?
Yeah, I think so. He says that the first thing he does, he goes into a club and he speaks to the coaching staff and he has to win them over. And he wins converts, and he did it everywhere he's gone. He's just had to win people over. The ones that won't be won over, just you're out the door. It's as simple as that. He needs people there that believe. You can't have, listen, any coach can have it. You've got to have a backroom staff that you trust implicitly. You've got to have players who know exactly what you want to do. When he gets that, he'll win.
Yep. I think you'll agree, Matt, it's going to be an interesting next couple of months ahead for Tottenham, right? Because I think, again, I always say this, that the manager can be the greatest manager in the world, but I always feel with Spurs' board that when the fans create noise, that tends to be the trigger for Daniel Levy and co to act. So it'll be interesting how these next few months play out. I think that there's a real firm belief that Ange Postecoglou is the right man for Spurs amongst many. But again, to balance that out, there's a lot of fans that maybe feel he isn't the right man. So it will be interesting to see how these next few months play out. I'm sure you agree, Matt. John, what a fantastic guest, right? And that's your first time with him. Been amazing, Matt, right?
Yeah, it's been absolutely incredible. So much insight, and like you said, John, the fans of a club know the club better than anybody else. But to get the insight and the history of the man who's trying to bring us to the very pinnacle has been absolutely fantastic. So I really do appreciate the time that you spent with us. You did say a while ago as well that we love football because it's so unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen. I would just say, as a Spurs fan, maybe 3 or 4 months where we know what's going to happen, just to relax a little bit, will be absolutely fantastic. But we know that's not going to happen under Ange.
Well, where's the Europa League final this year?
Bilbao.
See you in Bilbao, boys.
I tell you how crazy it is. Loads of people have already booked their tickets. As mad as this season is, it's been absolutely crazy. There's fans that have booked their tickets right now for Bilbao, despite the nature of Spurs as a club. So you're amazing. It's fascinating, John. A reminder, John, where can people buy the latest updated version of that book right now? Please tell this watching audience, nearly 4,000 of you watching us live. John, where can they find it? And for our listeners and audio as well.
Yeah, you can get it direct from Berlin, the publishers, and I think it should be out and about in bookshops soon. I think it's a reasonable print run because the first 2 print runs sold out. No doubt helped by the Spurs family all buying it. And I know there's a few Celtic fans that I know bought it, but lots and lots of Spurs fans bought it, and so we decided to do this new version, just kind of taking in a bit of the first year of what it was like. And glad to say it was kind of similar theme to all the other clubs he'd been at, so it wasn't too difficult.
Yeah. Well, we had Charlie Eccleshare on the show only a few weeks ago, who has left us, and Charlie said that Ange was by far his favourite Spurs manager, who we had the pleasure to interview. And I think, again, he was of the opinion that, whatever happens, he's a special guy and a special man. So, look, we'll see how these next few months play out. But, John, I want to say again, thank you so much for your time. Always an education. And we will be watching these next months with intrigue. I know for many, this will be a great pick-me-up for some that maybe need to be reminded of the things that Ange has achieved in his career. and that's whoever comes. We can't thank you enough, John.
Cheers, guys. Really appreciate it. Enjoy it all the time.
You're a star. Guys, to our watching audience, thank you so much. To my wonderful co-host, Matty Hayes. Matt, thank you so much. Guys, well, there you go. That has been your midweek edition of Last Word on Spurs. It's interesting to see what these times are ahead. Look, for us all here, we want to win. As I said earlier, there's a destination of all different ways to do that. But let's see where these next few months play out. From Matt, from myself, from the wonderful John Greechan, we've been the Last Word on Spurs. Please keep safe, keep well. And as always, come on, you Spurs.